Hi everyone, welcome to the pre-watch video for a wonderful topic called as securitization. Well, I've always preferred to be honest with my students. This topic is one of the difficult topics if you compare it with the others in the entire course of FSPM, which means that you'll have to be a little more logical, you have to be a little more sincere, and you have to go step by step as we explore this topic in detail. So, in this video, I'm going to tell you a story. If you get the gist of it, if you get the summary of it well, then I can guarantee that understanding the securitization, understanding greater details about securitization will not be a problem at all, right? So let's begin this journey of this wonderful concept. Let me start by asking, what is your understanding of the word investment? This is something that you would have used many times. And I'm sure as part of the finance, now you are part of that discipline, you're part of that family, you're going to continue to use this word. But what's your understanding? And a lot of thoughts must be coming to your mind right now. So investment is a mutual fund, investment is a real estate, investment could be in shares or in bonds, investment could be in government securities, could be gold on the other hand. So these are all asset classes. But what is the meaning of the word investment? It's an instrument. At the end of the day, it's something that you buy by putting in your money to meet an objective. We call it goal planning and things like those in wealth management. But a very generalized definition could be that it's a unique combination of cash flows. By putting some money today, I am getting access to some cash flows. Now, you may call these cash flows contextually, which means if I'm buying a real estate, you may call those cash flows that I'm going to get by the word rent. If I'm buying the equity shares, you may call the cash flows by the name dividend. If I'm buying bonds, you can call the cash flows by the word interest. So, the long story short, in the investment or an instrument is, while you're putting in your money, you're letting go of that principal amount, the major amount today, and making yourself entitled to some stream of cash flow. And it could be in any pattern. So it may not be for a few years and then ultimately you will say. So there is no specific pattern in that stream of cash flow. So to my mind, that's a good generalized way of looking at something which is called as investment. And of course you can contextualize that it could be in a particular country, it could be for a particular sector, it could be for in context of investment, what can be the objective, it is for my child education, is it for foreign travel. So you can add a lot of dimensions to this holy grail. And by using the word variability, I'm also adding the risk part into it, because as you know, that return and risk go always hand in hand. But an important point, people, that I want you to observe is that cash is the king while we're talking about investments and cash flows and corporate finance and anything and everything to do with finance. It's not an accounting class at the end of the day. So that's, to my mind, is a very, very simple explanation of investment. So if I have to make a risk and return analysis of an FD, here would be an FD, and perhaps here would be an equity share. Here could be your risk, and here could be your return. So you see, how do you differentiate an equity vis-a-vis, an FD? That equity share would give you a higher quantum, but higher quantum of return, but will also have a lot of variability into it. How do you measure variability? Risk is through standard deviation, through betas and all that stuff. How do you measure return? There are different theories. It could be a price return, it could be a total return, etc., etc. Not getting into that right now, but by and large, it's a combination. It's a brilliantly unique combination of how much will I get with what certainty, with what variability. Okay, and that brings me to the next question, that is the suitability of the investment uh, consistent over the holding period? What I'm trying to say is, And that's the moot point here, that imagine you bought some shares uh, last year, okay, and you did all the analysis possible as a finance student, and very soon as a finance professional you had access to all kind of knowledge, and you applied all your ratios, etc., etc., accounting ratios, financial ratios, and then you decide to buy a share, let's say ITC. But and you originally wanted to hold for 3 years, but you're 6 months down the line and you relook at your analysis, and now you think that you want to sell ITC. Your original plan for 3 years has changed. Why do you think the suitability? Why do you think that investment is not suitable to you right now? There could be a lot of factors under the sun. So it could be any investor specific factor would have changed. So let's say my aim was a particular level of risk and return, that could have changed. So ITC doesn't fit well into that. ITC being a large cap doesn't offer me an ability to earn 20-30% like a small cap would have. So if my objective in life changes, then ITC. So you see, it's an investor specific factor which can change the suitability of the investment. Second category of factors could be macro environment specific. So let's say suddenly there is a lot of backlash. Let's say there is a suddenly COVID happens. Okay, so I never wanted to take COVID example because that's 1 in 100 year thing. But let's say there is a slowdown in business cycle, and ITC is therefore not looking to be a good prospect. So there is a systematic factor here, or it could be a firm specific factor, which is unique again, but not an investor's problem, but the firm's problem, such as there's a lot of backlash against the tobacco companies, and because of which the ITC stock price is tumbling. So you see, there are a lot of reasons because of which the suitability of investment can go down. And one of that I have presented on the slide here. I want you to take a look at it. So while company A invested in this project, the average cost of capital was 7%, and the IRR of the project, the return that company was making out of the project, was 10. In this process, the company was generating an economic value addition of 3%. However, because of some downturn or any factor, the WACC increased to 10%. So you see, now the company, if they continue this project, is going to lose 1%. And therefore, the company is interested to exit. Well, simple question. If the company already knew that this is going to happen, they would have never accepted at the first place. But that's the challenge in finance. You have to forecast your future cash flows. And in case you're weak in forecasting, then you might have to face a problem like that. So tell me, what can the company do? Do you think the company will be able to sell all the assets and make a very nice exit? Now, very few times you have a good exit option available. So it's like saying I construct a building by spending 50 lakh rupees, but if I have to take my money out, that is by selling this building to someone else, generally the new buyer is going to demolish it and construct it according to their own. So the value of the building that you have constructed by spending 50 lakh rupees may not be worth more than 2-3 lakh. There are certain assets such as a piece of land where the value doesn't go down as much, but generally, whenever you're selling the asset, it's always at a lower price. Okay, if it, more particularly if it's a distressed sale. So, what do you think? Company A should do? An important point here, and a very important point here, that your investment may not be suitable to you, because the suitability was also a unique pairing between the investor and the investment. But there is a possibility that some other investor may still be interested in your investment. That means I'm not closing down on the project itself, I'm not closing down on the investment itself, but I'm just making a sale to other investors. So, what I'm trying to do is company B will be requested to continue the project from here on. So net, the assets, imagine the project is a factory. So the factory was set up by company A last year, and today the factory is unviable for company A. But it's not necessary that for company B also it will be unviable. Perhaps if cost of capital was a reason, company A's cost of capital had went up and therefore my NPV was negative, company B can still afford a better borrowing. So company B will be requested to buy the project from company A, which is, look at the movement of cash flows. The cash from the pocket of company B is going to be given to company A according to the market value at that moment. Company A will exit the project, whatever project is going to earn, whatever that factory is going to earn, good or bad, now will be coming in the pocket of company B. So you see, now company B is the new owner of the same asset. So this way, company A has been able to make an exit peacefully. Company B wanted the exposure and has, by the way, the same thing happens in stock exchange also. I bought some shares and I want to sell it. Whom will I sell it to? The one who wants to buy it from me right now. I think I've had enough exposure and I want to make an exit from a particular stock. But there is an investor out there on stock exchange in the secondary market who wants to take that exposure from me. So that's what I am essentially talking about. And also an important point, company B, which is bailing company A out from this project, is not restricted to continue the project till the end. I can sell it very well to company C if a year later the existing new investor finds out that now the project has become unviable. So what I'm trying to say is that the secondary sale in context that you know in context of shares is possible in other assets also. It happens in real estate, happens in antique, it happens in any asset because the suitability continues to change. At this point, I want to contextualize this discussion. I want to narrow down this discussion on one single instrument, one single investment called as loan. What is a loan? Loan is an agreement between a buyer and a seller of loan. So we call it borrower and a lender. At the end of the day, it's an investment by the lender. And I'm going to use a more common lender called as a bank. So bank decides to block their money today. They let go of the money in exchange of a regular cash flow. In this case, the cash flow is going to come in form of interest and in form of principal. You and I know that better as EMI. Okay, so EMI is a combination of interest and principal after all. So a loan is again a unique combination of the quantum of return that the bank is going to get and the variability with which it's going to come. Why am I using the word variability? Because different loans have different risk attached to it, and we call it credit risk, the risk of money not coming back, etc. Okay, and again, I want to contextualize the discussion. What if the bank who has given a 10-year loan, while at the time of giving the loan was very excited, a year later wants to take the money out? After a year, the loan as an investment is not suitable to the bank. What do you think the bank should do? Now, we can always debate upon the fact that should the bank liquidate the exposure so soon, etc. But that's not the point. The point is, if it has been decided that I want to move out, what is the option available with the bank? Can the bank force the borrower to pay? Imagine if it's an education loan, the student is still in his or her study period. You cannot force a borrower to pay early. What then would you do? You would request another bank to bail you out. And I'm using the word bailout. Bailout is a little negative word where it means that you're helping person in great distress. But bailing out also means in general helping out. You have to cut out from a particular situation. So in this case, my bank two, I can use names. What I'm using bank one and bank two. My bank two will pay money to bank one. Bank one will get out of this game. The borrower who was originally paying to bank one, the original lender, would now start to pay to bank two. For borrower, it doesn't matter. They have to pay the interest and principal. To whom it shouldn't matter to them. For bank one, they had given the money originally, but now they have recovered the money from bank two. They are out of the game. Future access to interest and principal is over. Whosoever has the exposure will get the cash flows. It's bank two now who has put their money in the game. It's a train which is already moving, and now bank two joins in midway, and now bank two is going to drive the show. And again, like we said in case of company, bank two is not restricted to continue for this till the end of the loan life. You can always sell it to bank three in that case. So people, you see that the basic instrument remains of a particular life, but the parties will continue to change. That's what is the basic genesis of securitization. You have to, students, look at the flow of value. Okay, there is going to be a roadblock in this whole process where the bank two wants to bail out bank one. Bank one needs money out, needs liquidity for any purpose. They have some other investments. They are, you know, they're facing bankruptcy or whatever else. Bank one needed money. Bank two was requested. Bank two says, I can't help you. Actually, I can help you, but I can't give you entire money. So, bank one says, do I have to negotiate with more than one investor to bail me out? Perhaps yes. And sometimes it's possible that there is no one big institutional investors who is willing to help you, in which case you can always raise money from retail investors. What I'm trying to say is, this is an education loan, or any kind of loan for that matter. This was given by, let's say, ICICI, and now ICICI wants to move out. So what can ICICI do? They can go to HDFC. The HDFC says, no, we can't help you. We are not interested in your loans, etc. Then can ICICI look at different individuals, look at different HNIs, look at other institutions such as hedge funds to help them? How would they coordinate with so many people? ICICI is majorly into the banking exercise, which is a sales job, more or less. You have to find out a customer, lend out, and then recover, etc. Managing all these back end investors is very difficult for ICICI. So here is what ICICI is going to do. Here is what my bank one is going to do. Bank one is going to shift the loan assets, the education loan in our example, to a separate balance sheet. And the balance sheet, the new entity will be called as the special purpose vehicle, a special purpose entity. Sometimes it is SPE. And imagine now your accounting knowledge. So there is a business which have assets in form of the education loan or home loan or auto loan or credit card receivable. It could be any asset, but they are generally the loans given by original bank, the ICICI. The point is, um, if ICICI is selling their future recoverables to this entity must pay ICICI back to bail ICICI out. You see, to bail ICICI out. The challenge here is that HDFC refused. Otherwise, life would have been very simple. Then what ICICI is going to do, Bank One is going to do, is to hire an investment bank. We call technically in this context as a structurer of the deal. The structure of the deal typically is done by investment banks such as Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, etc., etc. Lehman Brothers was one of the big daddy into this game, which sadly had to close down because of the subprime crisis, and that's what we're also going to discuss in the live class. Um, so what this investment bank is going to do, investment banks are very good salespeople. So what they're going to do is they will identify, market this pool of asset. This is the pool of asset. And don't forget what is in this pool of assets. They are different loans. If you had taken loan from ICICI, then your name is going to appear here. You were supposed to pay interest to ICICI as part of your repayment of the education loan. Now you would be paying interest to this SPV. How are you impacted? No way. Ultimately, the amount of interest that you have to pay is fixed by the loan agreement that you had taken earlier. So the quantum of the borrower doesn't change. It's to whom the borrower has to pay. That's changing. So ICICI shifts it out to an SPV. SPV is going to hire an investment banker. Investment banker is going to look at some of the qualities, etc., and then do a brilliant marketing job and will identify 4 investors who are willing to buy, let's say, 23% each, making it to 92%. Now this 8% is left. Perhaps I will request the original bank only to subscribe to this 8%, or I will, as investment bank, subscribe to it myself. The long story short, ICICI gave out loan recoverables to this SPV. SPV paid out cash. ICICI is out of the game. ICICI has been bailed out. ICICI got the cash back, this time not from HDFC, but by multiple people. And that happened indirectly. Those multiple people did not deal with ICICI directly. They dealt with SPV, and SPV gave money to ICICI. You see, there are layers getting added now. So, whom are the borrowers paying the interest to? They're paying interest to SPV. They stop paying interest to ICICI because ICICI is out of that game, and they don't know who these investors are. As a borrower, my contract is with SPV now. So here is a balance sheet of SPV. On one side, you have people who have given the money to business. We call them liability and equity. And on the other hand, are the resources that have been procured. And the resources here is not a machinery or a furniture, etc. It is a financial asset. So imagine that's how an NBFC's balance sheet looks like. It's very close to an NBFC's balance sheet or a microfinance balance sheet. You have different investors, you have some contribution from the promoter, and what does the NBFC do with the money, the cash? They lend it to different people. The only difference now is these people to whom the loans have been given haven't been selected by SPV. They were the original loans given by ICICI. So if they were of good quality, these loans are of good quality. If they were of bad quality, these loans are of bad quality. The quality of the loan hasn't changed. It's only the people who are funding those loans have changed. Okay, so the new investors, these four investors that I'm talking about, they will indirectly own the total pie. Why indirectly? Because loan is actually owned by the SPV, and SPV is owned by them in a way. Okay, and I'm not using the word owned from the point of the equity share. They are all debt securities. Oh, then it makes life very, very simple, because if an education loan gives 11% to SPV, SPV can easily furnish 10.5% to these people. So it's like I am raising money in form of debt and I'm lending money in form of debt. So do you see, it's a very simple banking model which is playing out with a little difference. That's what we are going to discuss in the live class as well. That there is a difference between a normal banking model and a securitized investment model. This is a securitization. You see, people, what has investor one received? Investor one would have given money to SPV. And what has SPV given? Not the shares of SPV, but the debt security of SPV. These are the debt securities we will discuss in the live class, will be called as asset backed securities or mortgage backed security. We will talk about it, but nonetheless, keep into mind, these are all the debt investors in this SPV. Okay, but there is a basic difference between the debt that these investors have invested in, and the way we look at it, a corporate bond or a bank FD. Okay, and the deal is very simple, people. If these resources, these loans, these education loan, home loan, of ICICI, if their borrowers honor their commitment on time, a lot of cash flow is going to come into SPV, and that cash flow is going to be given to these new investors. That's the marketing game that investment bank has played here. Should there be some spread which is available, which means if let's say, like I said, the 11% is received from the education loan, home loan, auto loan, and the rate of interest promised to these new investors is 10 and a half, there is a half a percentage, 50 basis point ka saving. Whom does this 50 basis point belong to? It belongs to the equity provider. It could be the original bank, ICICI, who created this SPV to do and play this game, or it could be some other investor as well. It's not obligatory on the originating bank, ICICI, Bank One. These are different names that I've used. It's not obligatory on their part to take the equity here. It's not. It depends upon, can the investment bank sell entire of the pool to third parties such as new investor 1 to 4? If yes, ICICI would like to exit the deal completely. If not, then sometimes to build confidence, you as ICICI Bank will have to kind of subscribe to your security as well. So people, in the live class, we are going to look at some of the questions. Will ICICI Bank transfer only one loan, or can they transfer different loans? Will ICICI Bank here transfer loan at one point in time, or can they make it a revolving cycle? You see, two different things. What kind of loans are transferred and when are the loans transferred? And also, will the loans transfer of the same credit quality? If no, does the new investors who have given the money to SPV, will they suffer some kind of credit risk? If yes, are they already told about it? If yes, why are they still buying it? Oh, perhaps the credit rating has been done. Ah, now that connects this entire topic back to the previous, immediately preceding topic of credit rating that we've done. You see, and at that point, we said that the securitization is connected to credit rating, and that's why the global subprime crisis happened, because the securitization model didn't do well, and the credit rating agency also had a role. So that's the reason it's all going to become very, very interesting for all of us to debate on. So people, I'm very excited to meet all of you in the live class. I hope that you did not find it very confusing. It's absolutely okay. In case you have done, you may want to look at it again. The key here is to always remember and look for that who is owning the loan receivables right now legally, who has given the money, who has taken out the money, and who bears the risk right now. So the way you will structure your thoughts around it, the easier it's going to become in the live class. Okay, I am absolutely excited to meet you very soon. Thanks very much for watching this.